guys, it's Alexis, aka The Sloth Reader, and I'm here today to do my January wrap-up. I had 13 things in the month of January. To be fair, one of them is a short story, one of them is a poetry collection, and 5 of them were middle grade books. I think I only read maybe 2 things this month that were over 300 pages. So I read a lot of things, but I didn't necessarily read a lot of pages. That's why I was able to read so much. Plus I listened to 2 audiobooks this month because I went back to my parents' house for my birthday. So anyway, it's a lot of things. So we're going to go ahead and just get right on into it. The first thing I read in January was The Summer Palace by C.S. Cat. This is basically a short story epilogue to the Captive Prince trilogy. You guys know I love the Captive Prince trilogy, so when I heard that this was coming out, because she wrote a couple of short stories since the finale of the series that kind of expand a little bit. This is basically an epilogue to the series, so it's basically about Damon and Laurent kind of working through all of the things that happened in the trilogy and kind of dealing with it and going back and looking at their relationship and kind of discussing some of the things that never got talked about. And I mean, considering it was only like 30 pages, it's hard to say I gave it 5 stars, but I loved it. I loved every second of it. I didn't want it to end. I love the series so much, and I love the relationship so much, and so it was so good. It was so good. I loved it so much. The next thing I read was Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. I am not usually a big poetry fan. Poetry is just not a thing that I don't feel like I usually get anything out of it. This was very much the exception. I had actually I saw this in the store and I kind of just leafed through it and read a couple of poems. And even the ones that I just read standing in the store, I felt like I connected to. In this book, she kind of talks about abuse, and she talks about how she had an absent parent, but she also talks about loving yourself and feminism and falling in love for the first time. And while I can't necessarily relate to all of those things, a lot of the stuff she actually writes about in Milk and Honey, I found myself relating to. I grew up without a parent. I definitely have this ongoing struggle with learning to love myself, and I'm super feminist, so I'm always here for that. But I gave this 5 stars because I legitimately cried a lot while reading this, and that's usually not something that happens because usually I don't get anything out of poetry, so just 5 stars just for the emotional connection I felt to it. I really enjoyed it. I don't read a lot of poetry, so I don't know whether this is good poetry. I mean, I know it's like super hyped up and a lot of people really like it, you know. I don't really have an opinion on poetry as a whole, so I can't really talk to that. I can just say that I personally really connected to this story. The next 2 books I'll mention together because they are the first 2 books in the series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket, which is The Bad Beginning and The Reptile Room. Obviously, I wanted to read the first 4 books in the series of Unfortunate Events before the Netflix series came out. I technically didn't do that, but I still haven't watched the Netflix series, so I mean, I technically read the books before I'm going to watch the TV show, which is what my goal was anyway. These books follow the 3 Baudelaire orphans, Violet, Klaus, and Sunny, as they basically continuously are moved from foster care to foster care after the death of their parents, and it's basically about they're continuously hunted by an evil man named Count Olaf who wants to steal their money. Each book has kind of its own plot to it. The first one is about them initially meeting Count Olaf, going and being sent to him to be taken care of. The second book is they get sent to live with their uncle Monty, who is like a snake specialist, and it's basically about how Count Olaf interferes with that. I gave both of these 4 stars. I really enjoyed both of them. I actually was surprised by how much I enjoyed them. I thought that because there are a lot of people's series introduction, like to books and stuff, that I would really not connect with it because they really are written for, you know, 10 to 12-year-olds, which, let's be honest, is 10 years younger than I am. So I was like, I wasn't sure if I would connect to it, but it's interesting reading them as an adult because instead of necessarily connecting with the story, I was more appreciating how a 10-year-old would. And a lot of the writing that Lemony Snicket has, I very much appreciate because there's so many vocabulary words and literary terms and literary devices and, you know, phrases that he introduces through the course of this series that a lot of children reading these books for the first time at 10, 11, and 12 would probably have never heard of before. And so I appreciate that these books are, on a certain level, very educational, while they're also still an adventure. And so I, like, as an adult reading this series, that was something that I really, like, that was something I was continuously, like, blown away by. As I was like, obviously I know what all of these words are, and I know what these literary devices are, like irony and stuff, but I was like, I can appreciate that he's, you know, subtly educating younger people while still writing an enjoyable story. And so, like, honestly, for that reason alone, plus my own enjoyment reading the series, I mean, I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read is one that I will not say I think is a perfect book. It's not. Will I say it's a book that I am now obsessed with and that I really, really love, and I will talk to everyone about it from now until I die? Yes, it is definitely one of those books. I listened to this on audiobook when I went to see my parents, and it is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. I loved this book. Like, it's not a perfect book, and I acknowledge that. I definitely think that it was a little short. I think if it had been a little bit longer, it would have been absolutely thoroughly fleshed out. But the group, the characters in this book have snuck up to be one of my favorite squads. Like, I loved the characters in this book so much. You have Nancy, the main character, who is asexual. You have Sumi, who is a Japanese character, who is, I mean, she's so funny. She's such an absolute joy to read. I mean, you can't help but smile reading her character because you're like, this girl. There is a trans character. There are a set of twins who absolutely smash gender roles. There is a Latino boy who, like, I just loved the characters so much in the story, and I loved hearing about each of the individual worlds that all of these people came from. The premise of the story is it's basically about, it's like a wayward home for children who have gone to these fantasy realms and have come back. And so it's basically like they feel that these other places they've gone are their true homes and that they're now stuck in our world and they're unsatisfied. And so the book is kind of like they go to this home that kind of teaches them how to readjust back into our world. And so I loved reading about the different worlds that all of the characters had gone to. And I loved the characters and their interactions. Like, so many of the conversations between the characters, I mean, just made me bust out laughing and just made me smile. And again, it's not a perfect book. I gave it 4 stars. It's not perfect by any means. There's definitely a few issues with it. One of them, like I said, is the length. I feel like we could have gotten so much more descriptions to really flesh out the world that I really would have liked. And I did find it a little bit predictable. I mean, like, down to the fact that I could predict some of the words that were going to be said next as I was listening to the audiobook, but that wasn't necessarily an unenjoyable feature for me. It's just that it was a tad bit predictable, but I love the characters in this book so much that I'm super excited the second one's coming out, and it follows Jack and Jill, and Jack was one of my favorite characters from the first book, Every Heart a Doorway, so I'm so excited to pick this one up. I'm so excited. Next 2 books I read after that, one of which I read on my Kindle, the next I actually listened to on audio on my way back from my parents' house, and that was the next 2 books in the series of Unfortunate Events, which is The Wide Window and The Miserable Mill. I gave both of these 4 stars again. I know a lot of people didn't love The Miserable Mill. I still really enjoyed it. These particular 2 books felt significantly darker to me than the first 2 books. I just felt like what happens in The Wide Window and what happens in The Miserable Mill were significantly darker, which as an adult I really liked. I liked that they were a little bit darker in tone, that there was a little bit more death and angst and torment, which sounds terrible, but I was like surprised. I was like, whoa. I was like, wow, that's a very heavy thing to give to a 10-year-old, so. But again, I mean, like I said with the first 2 books, I just appreciate Lemony Snicket's writing and the educational tone he kind of takes. I just, like, I can't get over just how, like, absolutely, like, amazed by that I am. Like, I didn't know that that was in the story, so, like, when I was reading the books and I was like, oh my god, I wish I had read these as a 10-year-old, I would have learned so much stuff, and so, like, anyway, yeah, I gave them both 4 stars. I equally enjoyed both of them. The next book I received was an ARC I got off of NetGalley, and that is The 100 Lies of Lizzie Levitt by Chelsea Sidoti. This basically follows our main character, Hawthorne, who is a very eccentric girl, and basically she is obsessed with this girl who was a couple years older than her in school, and she basically finds out that this girl has gone missing, and so to kind of figure out what happened to her, she basically inserts herself into this girl Lizzie Levitt's life. She goes to the diner that Lizzie worked at, gets a job there. She kind of, you know, starts going to the places Lizzie went, and she also kind of makes herself a friend of Lizzie's grieving boyfriend, Enzo. I gave this book 3 stars. It was very different from what I was expecting it to be. I think I went in kind of expecting a thriller, and it's really not. It's more of a contemporary about Hawthorne, because a lot of it is just about her going and, you know, being in high school and dealing with, you know, people and the relationship with her family, and it's very much a contemporary, and there were some aspects of it I really liked. I really liked a lot of the relationships in this book. I felt like they were really realistic, and I liked that the main character is very dramatic. She's pretty unlikable. I think she's intentionally unlikable, and so she was constantly kind of trying to make the world about her, and I liked that a lot of characters in the story basically called her out on it, and they were like, Hawthorne, not everything has to be about you. And I liked that because we don't really see that a lot in YA, where, like, basically you have people surrounding the main character who's obviously being selfish and overdramatic. You don't really see characters call them out for that. Which, let me give you an insight into the real world. People will absolutely call you out on that in the real world. So I really appreciated that a lot of the characters were like, Hawthorne, we're done. Like, no more of this stupid stuff you're talking about. So I really liked that aspect of the story. The romantic relationship that's in the story, I actually find was very realistic. You don't always get stuck, you know, not every person you date is going to be your in-game one true love. Sometimes they're going to be shitty people. You're going to date shitty people. You're not always going to be together. And so I really, really liked the relationship in the story. I felt like it was, you know, really, really realistic, in that, like, you kind of know when their relationship starts. You're like, there's no way that these two are going to be together forever. So I really, really like that aspect. Two of the complaints I have is that because Hawthorne was so unlikable, it really made it hard for me to be sympathetic towards her, which is sad because I actually can kind of relate to a lot of the stuff Hawthorne went through, but just the constant, like, just overdramaticness and the constant just need to be the center of attention, I didn't really connect to, and it really made it hard to connect to Hawthorne as a character. So when, like, and she was continuously making stupid decisions. So every time something bad was happening to her, I was just like, well, yeah, what did you think was going to happen? You decided to do A, B, and C. Like, yeah, obviously, this is not going to end up well for you. And the other thing is that this book, first of all, I don't feel like needed to be nearly as long as it was. I felt like a lot of the stuff could have been taken out of it. But I also feel like the author was trying to provide too many messages. I felt like there was, like, so many social messages in this book about, like, not being this, you know, not being about what it's like to not belong, but also, like, judging people based on their appearances, and, like, it was kind of ham-fisted how many, like, messages were in this book, and a lot of them didn't even really, like, show up until, like, the second half of the book, and then it was just, like, repeatedly, like, shoved in your face, like, this is a message, this is a message, this is a message. And it was kind of just like, okay, I get it. I got it the first time. I'm not stupid. Like, I got it the first time you mentioned it, that we shouldn't judge people by their appearances and blah, blah, blah. And so that kind of took away from my enjoyment of the book. But overall, I mean, I still think it was an interesting read. Maybe not the most memorable book I've ever read, but I still think it was interesting enough that I don't like regret reading it. The next book I completed in January was Sea of Monsters by Rick Riordan. You guys know that this my series goal challenge for 2017 is to finish the Percy Jackson series and read the Heroes of Olympus series, and possibly squeeze in the Magnus Chase books if I can. And I mean, I remember reading The Lightning Thief years and years and years ago, and I remember it being very fun. But I had forgotten just how much fun this series really is. I mean, Percy is funny. I laugh a lot at some of the stuff Percy says, and I really, really like how adapted to modern times these books are. I mean, I think Rick Riordan puts in a pretty decent amount of time thinking up how he can adapt these Greek myths to fit with, you know, the story he's crafting. I think Percy is a pretty realistic teenage boy. You know, in this book he deals a lot with certain insecurities he has, and I really liked that because I feel like sometimes we teach boys that they can't be insecure about the way they look and stuff like that, and this book actually kind of addressed that, and I really liked that. I really like some of the like subtle messages Rick Riordan kind of fits in his books. I really appreciate that. This book is middle grade, so some of the humor was a little immature for my taste. I mean, like fart jokes and stuff, like, I mean, yeah, I probably would have laughed at it when I was 12, but to be fair, that's the target audience for the story, not me, a 22-year-old. So I didn't really deduct the book any stars from that. I did give it 4 stars, and hilariously, the reason that this wasn't a perfect 5-star read for me is because this basically was an adapted version of the Odyssey by Homer, which is what it was supposed to be, and I applaud the creativeness that Rick Riordan put into the story to make it a modern version of the Odyssey, but I was surprised by just how similar they were. I was expecting there to be a couple of elements from the Odyssey, and then they would, like, the Cyclops, obviously the Sea of Monsters, and I was expecting those, like, to be the thing, and then there would be other stuff worked in from, like, across mythology, but this was literally, like, the Odyssey. Like, everything that happened in this book was basically the Percy Jackson version of the Odyssey, which was a little disappointment to me because I basically was predicting everything that happened. I was like, well, they're gonna go fight sirens next. Oh, look, they're gonna go fight the chick who turned everybody into pigs. So, like, that kind of dampened my enjoyment a little bit, but I'm assuming from moving on forward in the series, as it's going to get more plot-driven to the Percy Jackson world, there'll be less of that. So, anyway, I still really enjoyed it. It was still a great book. I can see why, for its age group, it's a standout series. The next book I finished in the month of January was Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. You guys know this was one of the 15 books I wanted to read in 2017, and I got my hands on a copy of it, and I basically started it right away. I was so sure I was going to love this book. So many people I trust their opinions gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars, and I was certain that I was going to do the same. And I'm so disappointed to say that I just don't feel that way about this book. I still think it's a good book and its merits. I gave it a 3.5 stars. I just didn't love it as much as a lot of people seem to. This basically follows a Chinese-American family, and it's basically in the present day of the story. You find out that the golden child of this family, they have three children, and the middle child, which is like the child that's like the golden child in their family, the perfect, can do no wrong child, she dies. And so it's basically about the family dealing with that and trying to figure out what happened to Lydia, and it's also a lot about how this family came to be. James, the father in the family, is the son of Chinese immigrants, and the mother, Marilyn, is the daughter of a single mother whose whole idea was like basically to be the perfect housewife, and she basically like raised Marilyn to do that, which was not what Marilyn wanted. I really had 2 main issues with this book. The first one is that it very much goes back and forth between the present and then the past and the multiple things that have happened in this family leading up to the present in which Lydia dies. And I felt like there really wasn't a solid timeline for that, which, like, they would mention an incident that happened when Lydia was 10 or something like that. But then, like, 4 chapters later, it would mention an incident where Lydia was 5. And it would, like, allude to Lydia being 10 and stuff. And I don't know, something about that just made it very difficult for me to follow because it wasn't linear. And it kind of made the story a little bit hard for me to follow, which ultimately resulted in my other big issue with the story, was that I really just didn't connect to any of the characters. And a huge part of the story is obviously the fact that, you know, this is a Chinese-American family. So the children are biracial, the mother's white, the father is the son of Chinese immigrants. That's a massive part of the story. And obviously that's not something I can relate to. And, like, I can acknowledge that, but I still feel like there should be something else to the characters that I can connect to, and there wasn't. The only character I really liked was Nath, which is the son of the family. I mean, even Lydia, like, I totally understood her feelings and everything that she was going through, and the immense pressure that she was put on by her parents for her to basically be what they never were. And, like, I get it, but it's just, like, it felt like these characters were reduced to that and nothing else. Like, I felt like Marilyn's only characteristic was that she didn't want to be the homemaker her mother was. That she wanted Lydia to not be the homemaker that she had eventually become. And for James, it felt like his only characteristic was that he was the son of Chinese immigrants and that all he had ever wanted in life was to belong. And I get that those are probably very real sentiments for people, but I just felt like there was nothing aside from that to connect to these characters, and, like, anything other, they didn't really have any other substance other than that, and they really weren't likable, so I wasn't, like, overly struggling to try and connect with them because I didn't like them anyway. I mean, I really didn't like Marilyn. Marilyn is one of my least favorite characters. I could not stand her. For personal reasons, I do not like her. But I just, there was such a disconnect for me from the characters that it just meant that I really couldn't enjoy or appreciate this book to maybe its full potential. The next book I completed in the month of January. I actually had tried to participate in the Diversathon, which went on the last week of January. It unfortunately ended up being a very, very busy time for me, so I couldn't. But I still did end up reading 2 diverse books during that time frame. And then, actually, I finished 3 books. 2 of the books I'm about to discuss, and then another book, I finished them on the last day of January. January 31st, I finished 3 books. 2 of which were books I had intended to read during Diversathon. The first of which is History is All You Left Me by Adam Silvera. This is Adam Silvera's second book. This basically tells the story of a boy named Griffin, as in present time he found out that the love of his life, Theo, has drowned, and he's trying to deal with his grief while also creating an odd connection with Theo's current boyfriend, Jackson. But it also takes place in the history, which is the story of Griffin and Theo's relationship, how they came to become together, what kind of went wrong through their relationship, what caused them to break up, and all of the subsequent things that happened. I gave this book 4 stars. It was good, but I find that my issue with this was kind of very much the same issue I had with More Happy Than Not by Adam Silvera, and it's that the first 2/3 of this book are wonderful. The first 2/3 of this book are 5 out of 5 stars, hands down. But then the final third of this book happens, and there's this, like, I don't know, there's like this massive disconnect between the first half of the story. So many new elements are introduced in the final third that don't really feel like they're taking place in the same story. And, like, there are these, like, things that come to light in the final third that you're like, I don't feel like this makes sense with the first 2/3 of the book I read. I feel like this could have been in a different story. I don't feel like it belongs in the story. And it's kind of very disorganized. It kind of just, like, when the final third happens, you feel like there's a lot happening, which doesn't really match the pace of the rest of the books. And so in this final third, you're like, what? 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 Wait, what? 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 And so, and that was literally the same issue I had with More Happy Than Not, is that, like, for some reason, the final third of the book just kind of falls apart, and it doesn't feel organized, and it feels like, honestly, parts of the final third of this book you could have taken out. The book still would have been okay, and you could have put those in a separate book, and they would have made sense in a separate context. That's kind of how I feel. I also feel like I kept expecting this book to end, and then I would check, and I still had like 50 pages left, and I was like, what? And so I kept expecting this book to end because I was like, that's kind of a perfect point to leave off on. Oh no, there's still 30 pages left. So I still think that this was a good book. I still appreciate the story. I was very emotional through the first half of this book. I mean, I legitimately cried through pretty much the entire first half of this book because of just the present time and Griffin talking about dealing with grief. And it was still a good book, and that's right. Just the final third of the story just keeps it from being a perfect story, in my opinion. The next book I'm going to mention is another ARC I received through NetGalley, and that is Dreadnought by April Daniels. Guys, look, if you're going to pick up one new release this year, that's like the new first book in the series, pick up this one. Because I'm not kidding when I tell you that I loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was nearly perfect for me. This basically tells the story of our main character, Danny, who is transgender. She is a male to female transgender, and it's basically about Danny was born a boy, and the first half of the story takes place as she's still a boy, and she basically witnesses a supervillain fighting a superhero, and the superhero actually dies in front of her and basically gives her his superpowers, and through that she basically wakes up as the woman she always wanted to be. And so the narrative is very dual narrative. Half of the story is about Danny being transgender and all of the things that come with that, you know, the prejudice she faces, the discrimination, the horrible people she encounters who immediately judge her based on that and not on the merits of her as a person. And then half of the story is about Danny being a superhero, Danny discovering these powers she now has and trying to decide if she wants to be, you know, a superhero or if she just wants to be a normal person, and kind of her discovering the exhilarating feeling of being a superhero. And one of the things I loved, first of all, I love Danny. Danny is a cinnamon roll, and I will protect her. I would take a bullet for her. She doesn't need me to because she basically is like the woman of steel, but I would because I loved her so much. And I liked that she was a character who I felt like really underwent a lot of development. A lot of times I feel like in YA, we have these characters who are really insecure, who are really dealing with the normal things of being a teenager, and then suddenly they gain powers and it's like they're a whole different person. Suddenly they're strong and they're, you know, fearless and they can handle anything, and I liked that Danny wasn't. Danny, you know, even after she gained her superpowers, she still struggled with being passive and being unable to stand up for herself, and she struggled with, you know, not being honest about who she was even after she got her perfect body and everyone could see that she was now a woman. She still struggled with hiding who she really was to make other people comfortable, and I loved that. I loved that we really got to see Danny go from being that person to being somebody who fully embraced who she was and, you know, not necessarily became fearless, but became courageous enough to stand up to the things that she feared. And so I loved Danny as a character. I think Danny is inspirational to everyone, but to especially, you know, transgender people. And so, like, I love Danny as a character. I apologize, guys. Actually, my camera died and I didn't have any batteries, so I'm having to film the rest of this on my phone, so it's going to be a little shaky. But I will go ahead and just try to do this fast because I have like 4.5 minutes, so let's get into it. But I feel like with Dreadnought, the trans narrative and the superhero narrative never got in the way of one another, and I feel like they shouldn't. Like, I feel like we should be able to have trans and queer characters in traditional, stories without it being purely about them being trans. And I appreciated that the story really, really melded the two together. Like, Danny was trans, but equally Danny was a superhero. And I liked that it was the two of them combined, that I never felt like the superhero story interfered with the trans narrative, but I also feel like the trans narrative never interfered with the superhero story either. And so I really liked that it was so perfectly balanced that it felt like neither story was sacrificing for the other. And I really absolutely appreciated that. The final book I read in the month of January was a graphic novel, which might actually also be one of my favorite books I've ever read, and that is The Sculptor by Scott McCloud. This basically tells the story of a man who makes a deal with death that he can sculpt anything he wants with his bare hands. In exchange, he will die in 200 days, and it's basically about the final 200 days of David's life as he falls in love for the first time, as he really discovers what he wants his art to be, what art means to him. And I loved this so much. I liked that all of the characters were kind of also dealing with things. It wasn't just about David's struggles. It was a lot about Meg's, a lot about Ollie's, a lot about the things that David's family has gone through, and a lot about how people are kind of all the same. We're all kind of the same. We're people. We all deal with things, and I really, really liked it. The art style is not, at first glance, really isn't like overly amazing, but like as you look at the art more and more, and some of the larger panels were breathtaking. It was so beautiful, and I really, really loved this. I actually think I'm going to go out and buy my own copy. This is a library copy. I think I'm actually going to go out and buy my own copy because I really, really liked it that much. And it was a fantastic graphic novel. It's like almost 500 pages, but if you guys really want a very engaging Faustinian story, which I'm always here for, you guys should definitely check this one out because it was just so, so, so good. Alright guys, well you should let me know, sorry again about the camera dying. Actually my camera died twice, but I had batteries for the first time, and then I didn't have any batteries, so I had to film the rest on my phone. So I apologize because I know this is just super shaky because I have really shaky hands. So I apologize for that, but I will actually, you guys let me know down below what books you read in January, what was your favorite book, what was your least favorite book, and I will see you guys soon in the next video. Bye!